Before looking at the next verse, I would just like to pick up on something from the previous verse. And the previous verse was about discrimination. And it said that without discrimination, there are no living beings. I suppose when we look into a text like this, we get used to some seemingly bizarre statements and then just proceed on our merry way. But what does this mean? There are no living beings. Well, I've talked about it in the previous video, but it's worth saying a little bit more about it, because what we're being exhorted to do here is to come to that point where there actually are no living beings. And the implications for this are huge. They are huge for our whole psychology. All the time we are relating to people. In fact, even when we're walking down the street, there's all sorts of connecting going on. And I think it's fair to say that most of the time, most of us are seeing ourselves through other people's eyes. Of course, we're not really. We're just seeing ourselves as we imagine other people might see us, which is quite a different thing, isn't it? A lot of people look quite ridiculous in their attempts to appear acceptable in other people's eyes, because they got it so wrong. They got it so wrong. Not just ridiculous, but even grotesque. But this is just an example of the effect of other beings. We feel a connection with other beings, a chemistry, maybe even a sexual chemistry. There's all sorts of ways we can understand that. I tend to think of chakras resonating with somebody else's. It's quite a nice image. I do have a problem if I'm in a cafe or on a train or something and a very attractive woman sits down opposite me. It blows my calm completely. I feel quite put on the spot. It's very difficult to maintain my composure. That's just how I am. So this is other beings, though. This is other beings. What if we didn't have all of that? I remember even once when I was on the Holy Island, Scotland, before it was developed the way it is now, they used to have a big yurt, a big circular tent for meditating in. And the cushions were placed all around the circumference. I noticed during the meditation that there was quite a lot of dynamic going on between the meditators. None of it being what you would call of a particularly spiritual nature. And I mentioned this to one of them, and she hadn't been aware of it, but once I pointed it out, she became aware of it. So they all thought they were getting on with their meditation, but at another level, there's all this chemistry going on, flitting to and fro between the different people there. So we're caught up in this field of other beings. And you can see yourself change in accordance with the circumstances you're in. When you're by yourself in your room, you've got a certain tone. When you go out into the street, walk down the street or get onto some public transport, train or a bus, your tone becomes different. When you meet people, some friends, your tone becomes different. When your friend introduces you to somebody else, or you find yourself perhaps waiting with some other job applicants for a job interview, tone is different. And that tone is determined not just by your own psychology, but by other beings. But what if there are no other beings? It says here, no living beings. When we're practicing, I'm reminded too of the performer who suffers from stage fright, or somebody who has to give a presentation to a large group of people and they're very nervous. And one of the bits of advice is for them to imagine their audience naked. I don't know if it works or not, but it's a standard piece of advice. I suppose the image is so shocking that it overcomes any stage fright. Maybe it works, maybe not, I don't know. But perhaps it would work if you practiced and you realized that there are no living beings. This isn't simply a metaphor. This is about realizing the truth of the situation. And it's not boiling down to some kind of facile solipsism, which says that there's only you, there's nobody else. That's ridiculous, because there's no you either. There's only the attention at rest, which is pure awareness or suchness. And as I've said before, we could call this suchness happiness with a capital H. It's one of the colours of the rainbow body that we inhabit. And because we're dropping materialism, this means that we no longer take our cue from the world in terms of allowing it to dictate our emotional parameters. As enlightenment practitioners, we are now at liberty to feel as incredibly blissful as it's possible. This is where these Mahayana sutras can be very wonderful, because this is what they're describing. They are pushing and pushing the envelope of bliss till it is all pervasive. How far, how positive, how blissful, how joyous, how happy is it possible to feel? This is the freedom we have to explore this and to go for it. Go for it. Go for what we could call absolute bliss. There are no caveats here. In the past, I would say, oh, if we say there are no living beings, does this mean we can start invoking all kinds of liberal middle class guilt here. There are no caveats anymore. We go for it. We drop it all. There's nothing to worry about. There are no caveats. The only caveats are if you're caught up in materialism. And we've dropped materialism. We are not allowing the world to dictate how we feel. We are not allowing other beings. Because let's just be quite clear about this. When I talk about the world, I'm not talking about some inert geophysical landscape. What's really being meant here is other beings. It is other beings that determine our mood, that determine our emotional tone. But if there are no other beings, whoa, how high can we go? There are going to be no melting wings here. We can fly right into the sun. Because that sun is what we really are. So this is the practice of no living beings. As we get on with our daily lives, as we interact with others, let's bring this to mind. Now, we're not denying anybody's existence here. Let's be quite clear about this. Because there's no existence to deny. So we must be careful that we're not just doing this as a response to other people. It is not a response to other people. It's part of our practice. It's part of enlightenment practice. It's part of our own realization. We are just turning the light of our insight, onto another part of the picture. Up to now, I've spoken about enlightenment being to do with our relationship with the world. It is really to do with our relationship with other beings. It's what limits us. It's what limits us. Again, I can imagine all sorts of objections coming up to this. I'm aware of them in my own mind. But really, these objections are part of materialistic belief. They're part of limitation. They're part of the limiting mind. So no objections. Look for yourself when you practice. When you practice, when you can actually get beyond your own mood, habit energy, the habit energy of your moods, when you can get beyond your fundamental mood tone, when you can come back to awareness, and it's the awareness which is hearing this, there's nothing mystical about it. When you can come back to this and experience everything happening here, when you can open yourself up to the different colours of the rainbow body, and you start taking your cue from mind itself, then you can start becoming free from this entangled network of beings. So this is a new tool to practice when walking down the street, or when I find myself in the jacuzzi next to an attractive woman. I can remind myself, no living beings. And as I said before, it's not about denying other people. It's about taking that as a cue to practice, to come back to awareness itself, to come back to happiness itself, to come back to pure mind.